is right now.
Yeah. And I start.
I'm going to admit all now.
Yeah. Welcome. My name is Yao Tom. I'm a program director of Customs, the Master Customs and Supply Chain Compliance, organizing this webinar. And our guest today is Norbert Kouwenhoven, and he is the lead person in the TradeLens team for contacting with customs. Nice thing is that he will discuss the TradeLens blockchain platform, and that the initial prototype was developed in an EU research project core, where we were jointly active. And since then, it became a real thing and a global thing, as Norbert will explain. By the way, some practicalities: please mute your mic and video if possible, because that takes bandwidth. Questions will be after the presentation, so there will be 15 minutes left at the end. And if you have a question, then please post them on the chat. Okay, so Norbert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yawa, and good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. Some people maybe good morning, because it's an open webinar, so people can actually dial in from all over the world. And that's the advantage of the downside, which that I can be with you in Rotterdam, of course. But this is an interesting way to do the seminar. And I hope you all can hear it and see it very well from your home. I'm going to talk a bit about...
Norbert,
yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Can you share your presentation?
Yes, I'm... sharing it now.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about customs in a world of private sector networks. And that's a topic which is dear to my heart. I'm in the TradeLens core team at this moment. TradeLens is a worldwide blockchain platform in the logistics, very relevant for customs. So that will be one of the things I will touch upon. But let me start first with customs. Trends which I see in customs these days, because a lot is changing. There is, first of all, increasing declaration volumes, explosion of increase actually. There's the Brexit, there's e-commerce, there's organic growth, there is Brussels rules, which enforce per shipment processing instead of batch processing. So volumes will multiply at least by a factor 5 in the coming 5 years, and some say it will even be tenfold. Then we have very volatile supply chains. There is agile trade anyway, but the corona crisis leads to reshoring, production location hedging. So traditional routes will change. Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty and volatility. There is the ongoing restraints on budgets, which we're familiar with, do more with less. There is an increased need for global government collaboration. There's EU rules, WCO, well, not rules, but instructions. There's things like the European Maritime Single Window. All these put demands on the way customs organizations operate. So alignment to those rules is a constant challenge. Then in the private sector, there's ongoing digitization. More and more the private sector works with digital documents, moving away from unstructured documents to structured information. So it's getting more and more, I would say, professional. And then the topic of today, the patchwork of private and public sector data sharing platforms, as I've called it. So there's a patchwork of overlapping, disconnected, partly connected networks, each with their own lens, with their own objective. They offer a vast data source and enormous potential for customs, and enormous potential for a different way of working, which I will touch on. Oh, too fast. there is a paradigm change going in customs. So there's definitely a shift, a focus shift, and that's supported by the use of new and available technologies. On the one hand, from what I call gatekeeping to monitor and enforce. So away from receiving a declaration, checking it and giving a clearance or no clearance, to having access to data, to do risk assessment earlier in the chain, using more information than just the mandatory declaration data elements. So I call it from gatekeeping to monitor and enforce. On the other side, from data ownership to data access. And technologies that, that are available, the blockchain, and I will talk a lot about that. Data analytics, extremely important. There is the cloud. It's maybe an IT hype topic, but it allows upscaling and enormous data analytics capabilities, which might be too expensive for customs to have in-house. So the movement to cloud will, I think, definitely happen. There's cognitive capabilities, also called artificial intelligence. You need that to work through the tsunami of data that's available, especially if you move from gatekeeping to the monitor and enforce and data access model. There's the Internet of Things, and there's 5G. All these technologies fully enter the space of customs. I will talk a little bit about TradeLens and how a private sector platform impacts customs. I think it has an enormous impact. It's an example of a platform. It's not the only platform, but I think it is a game changer. Let me talk a bit about blockchain, and you might all be already very familiar with blockchain, but just a few words to get everybody on the same page. So a blockchain, for me, is a way to store data in a trusted way. It means you store data on top of each other, blocks of data, and with a hashing mechanism, you make sure that the next block points to the previous block. And if you pull out one block, then the chain is broken and you can see that. So you cannot remove unseen a data element from a blockchain. Makes it extremely relevant if you want to store professional data, if you want to store legally binding data, bills of lading, financial information that you don't want to change. Blockchain is perfect for that. The other thing it has, it is a distributed ledger. It works with nodes. Every node in the blockchain, actually, I see that it is a database and it's a full copy of the other databases. And if you change one thing, if you add a block in one node, all the other nodes are updated. So that real time, if you make an edit in Kenya, at that same moment, customs in Rotterdam can on their node see that update. So no need to send a document, let's say a certificate of origin from Kenya to Rotterdam. No, if you make an edit, if you add a certificate in the blockchain in the Kenya side, at that same moment, that certificate is visible because a full copy is on the node on the Rotterdam side. The third thing, it comes with enormous strong encryption. So it's really difficult to crack or to hack it. Actually, with all the computer capabilities of today, if you have a strong blockchain encryption, you cannot crack that. And it will take about 10 years or so before the blockchains of today can be cracked with the capabilities and the capacities of the hardware. So it will take 10 years before we have enough hardware to crack today's blockchains. So I talked about distributed ledger, the blockchain. Hyperledger is a open source product which is used to build blockchains. So you can program a blockchain application. It comes with smart contracts, another word, which doesn't mean you need a lot of lawyers, but it does mean it's a workflow which you can more or less hard code in the blockchain, which can do like a traffic light system that 3 organizations have to give a green light before there is an integrated green light. That type of workflows, you can program that in a smart contract. What we used for TradeLens is a permissioned blockchain, which means all the players are known. There's no unknown participants. There's no anonymity, and that's in the view of, and that's an IBM point of view, the ideal form for a business-to-business network, which you need in supply chains. This is different from Bitcoin. We all know the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the first well-known blockchain. It's the other big blockchain platform. Bitcoin works differently. It's a public blockchain, so anonymous participants, and there is a data mining process, which is a big problem, by the way, in terms of computer capacity, in pollution, etc., and also in speed of the system. Because you have those anonymous players, you have constantly to check. In the Hyperledger TradeLens version, we just use from the blockchain the secure store element, which is very relevant, and the node model and its permission. So the access is controlled. If somebody uploads a document, you know it is Procter & Gamble, you know it is French customs. That is known because they are controlled. And with that blockchain speech, why do I tell so much about blockchain? Because if you look at supply chain, there is not a lot of data sharing. And we were actually pointed to that by Dutch customs, UK customs in the past. They said, dear private sector, do you know how much you miss because you don't communicate with each other? You don't share data. And we said, okay. And then let's do some trials. And in those trials, these were European funded research projects. And Professor Ten in the beginning already mentioned the core of them. Cassandra was another one. IT8 was another one. There was a few. And in those projects, what we did, we had volunteer companies. Flora Holland, Schneider Electrics, Heineken. There were the usual, there was a few front runners. There was Dutch customs, UK customs, US customs. And then there was IBM for some IT part. And we built what we call the data pipeline. So all the parties in the supply chain, which you see here, would dump their data about a container in a data pipeline, and they would share. And then suddenly, customs, let's assume Rotterdam customs gets a declaration which says toys. They would see in the data pipeline upstream that actually this started as a fireworks declaration with they would find a firework invoice or a firework company involved, and they would say, well, this doesn't look like a toys shipment at all, so we better check that. Or in terms of valuation fraud, they would get a declaration which says e-bike 50 euros. They say, well, yeah, 50 euros. If I look upstream, I see a Chinese invoice for 500 euros or 5,000 euros. So that was a fraud fighting instrument for them. For the traders, for the private sector, it was a fantastic productivity improver, because it sounds like strange, but when the truck arrives in the port to pick up the ship, very often the ship is not yet there, and the truck goes back disappointed. The next day the ship arrives, no truck, so missed opportunity. There are things like an inland, a river barge bringing medical or other material with a perish date to the port, and misses the boat, misses the ocean carrier, and the goods perish. So in the handover, timing and planning was always good. So after such a project, we always asked as IBM, so who gives us now the money to build this in reality? Because this was a demo or a pilot. And then it was always silent. And then we asked, why is it so silent? And people would say, well, first of all, we want to jump on the train if you have this, but we will not be the locomotive. We're not going to be the investor. Okay. Second argument, is this really secure? Because if I put data in, will my competition not straight away see it? Third argument, I'm dumping this now in a database, but you know, who has that database? And if somebody cracks that, he has all the data, it's too dangerous. So that over and over again, these arguments popped up in the various generations. And in the last project, it was the core program, we had a different approach. We used the blockchain. And as I just explained, then the three arguments came in. So it was secure. If a firework invoice was in the beginning, it cannot be removed. So for customs, a perfect audit trail, you can really see the history of in this case, a container. For the traders, the security, so the encryption, very strong, no risk that this is hacked. The database, because of the nodes, there's not a central owner. Is it the US who owns the database? Is it the EU? Is it the Chinese? Is it the United Nations? There was never somebody good enough. With the blockchain model, you have the different nodes, and there's a node in Europe, there's a node in US, there's a node in the UK. So that was a good model. So when we did a TradeLens pilot, we had Schneider Electric as a guinea pig, Dutch Customs, and they said, well, with this technology, we would believe in this. We would use this. So then Maersk and IBM's invested, built TradeLens. You see here an architecture. On the top, you see a supply chain. So a BCO, a beneficiary cargo owner, exporter, importer, a shipper. A 3PL, you see a truck moving it along customs, goes to the terminal on a ship. Then maybe, let's say, in Singapore, it arrives in a port on the terminal. There's another customs, it goes on a truck. Maybe there's another ocean leg. Maybe it goes to China, goes on a train. We track containers, sea containers, from the moment they're picked up empty to the moment they're delivered empty. So they're opened, I should say, they're opened. And then from each of the parties, we ask to provide events. So customs release, we also have from customs, the vessel departure, a gate in, a gate out. So all those events from which happen to a container, we ask the parties to call it upload to the system, including the documents they generate. So a packing list, a bill of lading, a declaration, a prepaid invoice, a certificate of origin, whatever they want to give, we happily accept. And they are then, with a data sharing model, they will only be shared by those who touch a container. So if you upload something about a container, you're part of that little family that moves that container from A to B, and you're entitled to see the documents and the event. So you can plan better, you can see the documents, but your competitor will not have access. So we built that, and then we use blockchain, as I said, so the documents that are in are immutable, they cannot be changed. Customs can see the firework declaration. They can see the toys declaration was actually firework. They can fight valuation fraud. There's a lot that can be done. Basically, it's a win-win for everybody. The network. So we started this 2 years ago. We went live. IBM and Maersk put money on the table, and we said it has to be an industry-wide network. It cannot be a Maersk game. It has to be industry-wide. So it's open for everybody. It's meant to, I mean, the ambition is to have not all the sea containers, but to have enough to make this really relevant platform. So we don't want a monopoly. We think there will be other platforms, and there are other platforms. But at this moment, we're aiming for at least 60% of the world's containers. And that is because the launching client, which is Maersk, has put, and you see this on the map, all their APM terminals on the platform. All the Maersk containers will have their data on the platform. So we already have a huge amount of information. There's 800 million events tracked, 5.5 million documents on the platform, and 15.5 container trips processed per year at this moment. And that's only the Maersk ecosystem, if you like. 90 ports directly connected, 600 ports provide data. We now have the other big ocean carriers, CMA, MSC, Hapag-Lloyd, O&E. They all have, after initially being very negative, as it won't fly and blockchain won't fly and it's a Maersk thing, they now say this is a really good idea, we're going to join. So they're now joining. We're preparing technical connection of them, so they will also put their data on the platform. So this will increase enormously. they're now post-negotiation about Maersk has to pull out, so to say. They don't want it to be a Maersk thing, so the Maersk people are replaced by, and I wouldn't say replaced, but there's a combination of the carriers who get the say in change requests, priority of functionalities, that type of things. They will be in the steering committee, so they're fixing now that the final things about that. So soon they will put their data in, and then it will be really, like I said, 60% of all the containers have their data in the platform. That means a lot for customs, government authorities. So here's a list of customs organizations I'm talking to. I'm the customs guy in TradeLens, the authorities guy. So I talk to customs. You see here a few examples: Azerbaijan customs, Australia, Bahrain, Canada, China, Dutch customs, Jordan customs, Qatar, Russia. And this is just a list. What do they do with it is really different depending on their location, their special situation. So I give you a few examples. Dutch customs, from orange to green, what they do, they get customs declarations, and for some it's really clear they're green, and for some it's really clear they're red. But there's a lot which is kind of orange. Is it, what is it? So TradeLens is an additional source of data. So the targeting officer gets access to TradeLens and can pull data, additional data from the platform. He can look at the bill of lading, he can look at the packing list, he can look at, is the origin of the container indeed the location what I expect? Is it a route which is normal? Is the weight, the VGM, the verified gross mass, which you can also find in the platform, is that in line with the number of items declared? Whatever clever things he wants to cross-check. And he can also pull in, of course, other counterintelligence sources. There's a blacklist, there's a trader history database, of course. And TradeLens is another source to help them to figure out whether this orange shipment is green or red. So improving the targeting. Dutch Customs did a pilot. They're now considering how to scale up. It needs some IT adaptations. They started manual, but if you have a big port like Rotterdam, you cannot do this manually, so it has to be automated. So they want to include that in an automated improved risk assessment. There are also ideas about giving TradeLens users a straight-through processing, because if you open up as a supply chain and you provide all your data voluntarily to a customs, which actually that's what you do with customs, what you do with TradeLens, then you should be rewarded. And in the idea that there's permanent access to the relevant documents by customs, you could even argue, do I need a customs declaration? If I can pull the data whenever I want from TradeLens, can I move from declaration processing, gatekeeping to monitoring? Can I go when already the ship leaves China? I can already do my first risk assessment, and I see a risky shipment, and I know already when this one arrives in Rotterdam, I will take it by the hairs. You can do all that type of stuff. You don't need a declaration for that if you have access to the full supply chain data. So that's just thinking in Dutch customs. Another example is Saudi Arabia, who have a 2030 program. They want to really upgrade their professionality and moving away from opening every container, which they do today. They have a huge army of Philippine and other guest workers who do that. But it's very ineffective. So they want to do that more effective, and they want to be attractive for trade. So they use TradeLens to have a digital contact with the importers. They want to use the data from the documents from TradeLens, which you see here, to pull data elements from the seaway bill, the packing list, the booking request, the bill of lading, and to pre-populate an import declaration. The same way in the Netherlands, we have a pre-populated tax form for the income tax. So if you as a trader, push on the green button, you're okay with the pre-populated form, you can go straight through. If you're not okay, you have to talk to customs and it will cost you time. So they think that's an enormous trade facilitation. and I think so too. So that is a very modern way of improving your attractiveness as an economy, as a port to import containers. Here's some other examples of customs engagements. I talked about the Netherlands. Canada is looking at TradeLens, first of all, for commercial optimization. So the train company onshore in Canada wants to know when a ship arrives, already a week before it arrives, a huge Maersk container with 40,000 containers. They want to know how many of those containers end up on their trains. And then how many of those will go to the US, how many will go to Vancouver. Today, they don't have that. They get that 2 days in advance. With TradeLens, they can see that weeks ahead. Customs uses it for improved targeting, and they are testing whether it's good enough to waive import declarations. So if we have all the data elements available, why would we ask companies to put the declaration in? The ship is coming, we can check whatever we want. Saudi Arabia, talked about it. Indonesia, different. They're happy with having a full digital availability of the information. So that's already a big step for them. Azerbaijan, another example. That's where I got the e-bike example. They have big problems with valuation fraud. Their cargo comes through Georgia because they are landlocked themselves. And in Georgia, there's a lot of clever people who change documents and know if they change the value of an e-bike, they don't have to pay a lot of customs duties into Azerbaijan. In the shops, the e-bikes is €5,000, but on the declaration, it's only 500. And now Azerbaijan customs can look in TradeLens upstream, see the original commercial invoice, which is shared by the shipper, and see that the original value was indeed €4,000, €5,000, €6,000, and they can catch the valuation fraud. Different customs have different objectives, but so far they all love it. We ask customs to become part of the container family, because in order to get the data, you need to participate in moving the container. Customs is extremely relevant in a supply chain because they are cost causer, cost driver. So they can make or break a fast movement through a port by a fast clearance or a slow clearance. An inspection is a real killer, but to be honest, that doesn't happen that often. 25% of the cost of moving a container is related to border crossing, and big part is about compliance. It's about collecting documents, question and answers. Can you give me that document as well? And then the trader has to find out who has the document, which version, and then customs says to, can you give me that document? That question and answer is a big time consumer. You take that away if you have all the documents digitally available. So customs is a make or break. We ask customs to provide a release message and inspection progress, not confidential data, but logistic information. When do you expect the inspection to be done, so that the traders can plan? And that planning is really helping them. And in the data sharing rules, because we are very GDPR sensitive, customs gets access to all the data in TradeLens because they provide their part, which is the logistic information of the movement through their processes of a container. An example of a company, so on the other side, on the private sector side, this is a tire trader who uses TradeLens. They use it for the bill of lading data, which goes up and forth between, let's say, Maersk and the tire trader, to do that electronically. Today they call 5 times a week to the terminal whether their containers have arrived, because they have limited space in their warehouse. They can see that in TradeLens, or you can get automated triggers. At this moment, they're looking to automate the declaration. So this is a Dutch company, they now have to file an import declaration. They want to automate that and pick the data elements from the TradeLens data, and then shoot in the customs declaration. Customs will know that it comes straight from the blockchain data, so it's a really de-risked declaration. So a win-win for both parties. then my last, or not my last, but then something about customs has to figure out how best to use this. So one thing is paving the cow path or improving it by improving the declaration process, so having additional information on the side, what I showed from the Dutch customs example. Another one is to say, well, we're going to monitor the supply chain and we're going to give a supply chain like an AEO status for a company. We give them a trusted lane status for a supply chain. If you so the customs would set rules, if you as a platform always have a packing list, a bill of lading, and a commercial invoice, and if I have access, then I will allow you to be de-risked and you will have less troubles with getting your stuff into the country. That's the type of rules customs can set, and they can move to 1-star, 2-star, 3-star trusted lanes. They can go in steps. They can say, well, okay, before we go there, if already you use declarations automatically generated from TradeLens data from the blockchain's trade, we would de-risk you. That's 1-star. If you do, well, you can set rules for different 1-star, 2-star, 3-star trusted lanes. In the end, I think eliminating import declarations, giving a waiver for a lot of documents, certificates, because they are available in the blockchain, and you would audit the way they use the platform instead of checking declarations. Brokers, who are of course losing a bit of business, they could be hired to be a trusted or a certified broker who would guarantee that a supply chain is behaving properly and is really a trusted lane, is trusted lane worthy. So this way the model changes. It's really a paradigm change, and customs has full control over, full visibility over what's happening in a supply chain, and can already track fraud when it's leaving, I don't know, Colombia, South America, wherever it comes from, instead of waiting for the declaration. But customs still has to set the rules, and that is, where we are. It's for people like you, the front line, to invent this and start using this. Then this patchwork of networks, and there's a lot of platforms. TradeLens, the orange line, which you see in the picture, works with APIs, so containerized, if you like, for the technology people under us, amongst us. You just send in the container number and a lot of data, and it's stored. You shoot in the container number, you request, and you get a bill of lading or other data. So all the blockchain stuff happens under the motor hood. And that way we also want to connect to port community systems or other trade platforms. A trade platform like Portbase in the Port of Rotterdam, or MGI in the Port of Marseille, a national logistic platform like they're building in Russia, KLNet, South Korea platform. They're all platforms who have data. We as TradeLens try to not connect the world, but we make data agreements with such a platform that they get access to container data if they provide the local data or the hinterland data they have. And that way it's a win-win. So the Port of Rotterdam would get the information from, let's say, the Chinese side. So they can then also tell their clients that the ship has left China, or it's on the train, or it's stuck in Singapore. While we get from, for example, Port of Rotterdam, has it already moved on the river barge? Is there in the port a delay, or the port is closed because of strong winds? That type of win-wins are everywhere, and we try to connect with as many networks as we can. We don't see them as competitors. We see them as data sources which strengthen our value proposition, and the other way around. So APIs to connect, events to share, and documents to share, and preferably a data model and an ontology which makes us speak the same language. So we follow WCO data model, UN-CFACT ontologies, and that way we optimize the communication with other platforms. that was in a very fast way. I hope it wasn't too fast, and but to give you an overview of platforms, and also hoping that you get that it really can change the way customs work. I think it's inevitable with the volume growth that customs start to use those platforms, that they, in return or as a consequence, will have access to you can call it an ocean of data. Negatively, you can say a tsunami of data. You have to process them. That is a new form of art. So data scientists will be very, very important in the future of customs. Automated controls, maybe controls, algorithms which are delegated to the private sector. You can already ask a terminal or a carrier to run certain checks. There's a whole new world out there for us, and us is really you, and I'm just shouting from the side. You're the core people. A whole new world to invent and to implement, and the technology is there, and it is happening. With that, I rest my case and stop sharing and give the floor back to Johan.
Okay, thanks, Norbert. There were already some questions and comments, and actually there was a very interesting question about what the WCO vision is on TradeLens. And actually there was a comment by Frank Heijman, and perhaps I can quickly unmute him so he can share some of his thoughts, because he had some, yeah. So, okay, then so what he says is, in the new updated SAFE framework, there is in the draft, in the new version, the ISCM. It is possible that this type of platforms are indeed having a role like the one you described. So this is a very promising way. So as you pointed out, that more and more data will be shared by platforms and make it available for companies to share their data to customs. And then basically it is perceived as a form of de-risking, because the more data you share with customs in any means, and this is one of the typical means, that companies have the opportunity to share more data throughout the whole supply chain, also the supply chain partners. So the answer is that, if I interpret it well, of Frank Heijman, is that yes, it's supported by not just TradeLens, by the way, any data sharing platform. I see some other questions. Thanks again for these questions, and Frank Heijman for your answer. Martijn van Kaarling, Dutch customer, he is asking, are platforms like TradeLens replacing the concept of single window, or are they complementary? Or what's your view on that?
Yeah, that's a very relevant topic. So we're more or less figuring out, the world is figuring out how to do this. They're complementing. So and that was a little bit my last slide with where TradeLens was connecting different platforms. I see a single window as such a platform. So definitely is not replacing it. It could technically, so the technology, you can use that very well for a single window. But TradeLens itself is not aiming to be a single window. We think, and we see that also happening, that, for example, EU member states would have a single window, a maritime single window, maybe underneath a custom single window. Some countries like Russia have a national logistic platform, which is like a mega single window, which they want to make mandatory for all the companies to use. So slightly different from, or very different from, the EU way of working. But we see them as a given, and TradeLens would connect the single window, would give the single window access to information from another single window, for example, in China or in Peru or in another place. So that's the way we want to do it. And for that, it's needed that you have both APIs. You can shoot data up and forth, that you can trust each other's data sharing, the GDPR, the confidentiality models, and that you talk the same language, that if you say estimated time of arrival, that somebody else also means that it's the time of arrival at the terminal and not the time of arrival at the country border, for example, which if you talk, let's say Canada, that's 24 hours difference. You arrive at the country border and 24 hours later you're in Montreal. So those things, that's what we see happening now. How do we connect, and what language are you speaking as a single window?
Okay, thanks for this answer. And another question that pops up a couple of times is about the standards. So the data standards, and you could differentiate between two types. On the one hand, you mentioned already a bit about UNCFACT, that you use standards from international organizations like UNCFACT, but more in general on logistic data. So how do you assure that you use the right standards? Because there are all kinds of standards all over the world. And the other thing is the technical interoperability. So how do you standardize your technology in such a way that it can interface data and exchange data with other blockchain platforms? So if you can give an answer to those two questions.
Yeah, so technically, I said already, the blockchain part is under the motorhood. So that is, let's say, internal TradeLens. If you communicate as a customs to TradeLens, you would just send a message, an API, JSON message, like an XML message, to the platform, which has a container number. And if you upload, you add a bill of lading data or a release message, timestamp, and you shoot it to the platform. That's it. If you pull something, you send a container number and you get a full message back, an XML message with all kinds of data. So technically, you don't have to worry about the blockchain. The blockchain is inside. And that's how platforms in general, how Portbase communicates with TradeLens and how TradeLens communicates with NGI in Marseille. And also how a company like, let's say, Procter & Gamble or so would upload data to TradeLens or pull data from TradeLens. So technically, APIs, so application programming interface. The content of the data, that is more difficult. We have, so we follow existing standards as much as we can. I already mentioned the WCO data model, which is, of course, in Europe is very well followed. UNCFACT standards, what is a shipment, what is a consignment, so that is very, very precisely defined. We use those. We have, so a company can upload a bill of lading as a document, as a PDF, but we also have, and a PDF can have whatever you put on it. It's just a PDF, it's a scan. So we have a number of documents where we have structured messages. So for example, for a bill of lading, for a commercial invoice, for packing list, we have defined standard. We have defined, so TradeLens has set a standard, what structuredly the document should have. And I give again, let's say Procter & Gamble uploads a bill of lading, then they would use that upload channel, and so it would get structuredly uploaded so that it is in the format that is usable by everybody. TradeLens has quite a lot of market power. You can imagine with 60% of the world's containers, we have a relevance. The carriers, Maersk, CMA, MSC, these are big players. They have teamed up and they're working on, in the DCSA organization it's called, they're fastly producing new agreed ways for documents. So it's really improving as we speak. The last half year, they set 5 or 6 new rules. So that is helping. Outside of that, we just accept what a supply chain uses. So if there's a supply chain from Colombia to Norway and they use specific documents, as long as they in their supply chain are happy with that, we just support that. They can upload all the PDFs, they can share that amongst each other. US Customs would just get what they upload. if you set rules that you want them to use the documents conform standard ABS-C, and I think you should do that, you can benefit. If you don't, they will just use what they use. So standards is a never solved topic, fastly improving. And our ambition in TradeLens is to have all the documents structured so that it's JSON, but it's like XML, that we have XML messages for each document, and that everybody knows a bill of lading in TradeLens has this format, a commercial invoice has this format, a certificate of origin has this format. And we are now working to set those rules, and every 2 months or so we have a new document worked out. We're currently working on the e-bill of lading, electronic bill of lading, which is also a game changer for the industry. And because we have such a big traction, we can influence standards also.
Perhaps, Norbert, this is because the new questions are popping in, so that's very nice, a lot of interest. One issue was raised, and it relates to this topic. And next, you were mentioning the bill of lading, and there are, of course, also large global blockchain initiatives that also work with the bill of lading. For instance, WeTrade, that's various large international banks. They joined forces and they made the blockchain platform. So they have a blockchain, a bill of lading. You have it in your blockchain. How do you see the interfacing? Because at the end, there will be various logistic blockchains. There will be various for the finance, but also for the air cargo. And you are more focused on maritime. If you can say a few words on that. So how to collaborate and interoperate.
So as a customs organization, you need to create a level playing field. So whatever you grant to one platform, you basically should also be able to grant it to another platform. However, you can set rules. You can say, before I give a platform a trusted lane status, they need to be A, B, C, D, E, and F. They need to be secure, stable. You can set the rules. You want them maybe to use specific standard documents. So customs is a big player in this, and this is a call for action. Please take your role here and start setting rules. From TradeLens side, we are set up that we appreciate and accept other platforms, other blockchain solutions, and we just simply connect. So we need to know how their API works, and if somebody in TradeLens wants to access wants to access a bill of lading from another platform, he just connects to that API. So let's say Procter & Gamble. I don't want to pick on Procter & Gamble. Maybe Heineken is a better example. It's always good example, nice example. Let's say Heineken uses TradeLens, but uses an e-bill of lading from another platform. Heineken would shoot APIs to TradeLens for the events, for the commercial invoice, for the declaration, but pull the bill of lading with an API from another platform. And that's the way the private sector is going to work. And the same for customs. You would pull data from TradeLens for information about the container, but you would shoot an API to maybe a platform from French customs with their blacklist to compare that. You might have an API to the Ministry of, or to the single window to complement data as well. The whole thing is, so as a user, you don't have the data, you have data access. So you have platforms where you're entitled to go in and you know how their APIs work, and you just
pull whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. One other question is that popped up. You gave the example of a pre-populated custom declaration.
Yeah.
And that should be more trustworthy too. For instance, Saudi Arabia was doing that, Canada.
Yeah.
But how can you assure as a platform the quality of the data input by the companies?
Yeah.
So how can you make sure that the data is, although it's all encrypted and in the blockchain, how can you assure that it was good to start with, the input data? Yeah,
that is so we started as TradeLens. We said, listen, guys, that's not our job. We just are data, data in, data out. If you put garbage in, you get garbage out. At some point, we realize you cannot sustain it. You cannot say we're just a data platform. So we have to take some responsibility for the quality. You can do consistency checks along the chain, the same as a customs should do if they monitor. You should compare, is it toys all the way, or did it start as fireworks? So if there's these deviations, you can flag that as untrustworthy. If you get, you can rate the reliability of providers. So for example, if a terminal in a port always gives a gate out which is different from the received on the ship from the carrier, you can at some point say he has a 3-star reliability or 5-star reliability. So we can give some opinion on the quality, but we don't we don't refuse bad data so much. So it is still the trusted, or no, it's still the quality of the trader who will play a role. And so customs has a role to pick out the bad stuff. We can do a little bit of that as like a front end. We can run some checks, but that's where it is. So it is.
So it's basically
us,
basically checking. So you can, because you have multiple source data yourself in the platform. So you can, the example you gave about the terminal, so you can cross validate and that increases the accuracy. And another element could be that you do some vetting of the people joining your platform. So you could also decide to say, well, they should be kind of AEO-like companies before they can join. We do not accept simply all people that want to, or all companies that join the platform.
Well,
and then you could become a more trusted platform in itself.
It is yes and no. So we hope that customs will set rules which allow us to refuse or not refuse companies. For us, it's very difficult to refuse because we say we are an open industry-wide platform. Everybody can join. We don't want to block specific companies. So we hope to use it. And we also think there's a self-hygiene thing. If you are what I always call Tony Mafioso, you are stupid if you use TradeLens because all your documents and things are available for the authorities, and it's very difficult to lie consistently. If you really want to lie all the way from China to through Morocco to the transship and then to Rotterdam, you are an artist. So we think that helps. And I was going to say one other thing. What we can guarantee, and it can be audited, is that a declaration, a pre-populated declaration, comes indeed from data element number 3 in the commercial invoice, and that the value comes from document B. So the algorithm which we use to pre-populate, we can put that in a smart contract, so in the blockchain, and anybody can, so that's why I see this certified broker role, anybody can audit that to say, indeed, this is a document straight from the, generated straight from the blockchain. And that is, that's the part we do. But if the commercial invoice contains data that are not accurate, then we are lost. But it is used in the supply chain. So then the whole supply chain uses that. So self-hygiene.
Well, so if I try to summarize, so there is an element of, because of the transparency, you simply have the whole all the data related to a certain shipment, so you can use that to cross-validate. And that could also increase the data quality. There's the transparency argument that simply companies know that the data is basically stored, and in particular customs partners can see all their data, so they become more careful and might consider not to join if they are too crooked. So the various questions also related to, and you mentioned it a couple of times, that the blockchain, TradeLens as a blockchain platform, becomes a custom broker almost. So how do you view that in the future? So will it be indeed having on the one side all the input data for preparing a custom declaration, Is that kind of thing you think about, or how do you view that?
Yeah, so I think an automated declaration is a step in between. It's a temporary stage. It's improvement from what we have today. But at some point, I think the declaration will be replaced by just a notification that a container has arrived. So customs gets a message, container expected on the terminal, and that can be a few weeks ahead. That is the declaration. At least, let's put it differently. The declaration is considered to be done because the ledger, the TradeLens, is considered to be the ledger of the declarant. So because you make entries in TradeLens, conforming the rules that customs set, customs can consider that to be a declaration. It's a bit philosophical, but that's how the legislation is also satisfied. The UCC allows for that. Entry
so you mean just to what you referred to is entry in the declarant's records.
Exactly.
So this is the article, and the blockchain platform could be a declarant's record. And so that is basically, it's almost equivalent to a declaration.
Yeah, and this the automated declaration through smart contract or by in the beginning by the importers themselves. So the customs says we'll do it as a service for the trade. I think that works very well, but it is just because emotionally people like to have a declaration, or maybe I don't know why, but so I can imagine it has a role. But for me, I think it's more important. Data access is the most important thing.
Yeah. And perhaps there were some comments is that typically a declaration is also a trigger for customs to know what to expect, what to inspect. So in that sense, even though you might say all the data comes from the TradeLens, it still might be useful to give, to agree on a signal that comes from the platform informing customs administrations that a container is arriving. So in that sense, it could still be useful to have an
but the form, the shape and form. So the declaration is the minimum set that customs dares to ask mandatory. Customs wants to know, of course, everything. So in theory, any customer wants to have all the data available in the declaration, but that's not doable. So there's legally, customs says, okay, let's not make it too difficult for the trade. But you have to have data element 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But it's a limited set. So yeah, there will always be companies who don't use TradeLens and will do a declaration, but you want much more. If you have an automated declaration, you want that still to happen, then I would say then expand it with all the data elements you like to have as customs, because these guys in TradeLens or platforms voluntarily are okay to open up, as long as you treat it as, of course, you behave properly as customs, you don't use it for commercial purposes, etc. But with European customs, that's not an issue. To be honest, I know some companies don't trust certain countries. And there, as TradeLens, we have a bit of an issue because we say, well, if you use TradeLens, bad luck, your data goes to customs. So, you know, you have to decide up front. If you play, you're transparent. And some say, does it also mean country X? Yeah, that's also country X.
So we are approaching the end, but perhaps some last question is, well, there's so many interesting questions, but could it be that in some countries that customs administrations would say, well, we, rather than developing our own declaration system, we reuse the input, and then of course they will give you all kinds of instructions, how the interface should look like, but that it could in future be for certain countries, perhaps even small countries, that do not have the resources to build every 5 years an updated version of the custom declaration system. Is that a consideration? Have you discussed that?
No, but I think it's taking it to the extreme, but I think that's the right way to think about it. And let's be realistic, this will not be next year or next week. This is something 10 years or so before we have this running, but we have to start figuring it out and implementing it now for the trusted streams first, I would think, and then see how far we can go. But yeah, why not?
Yeah, yeah. And one last question. And so the question is, launching declarations, the responsibility is still with the specific traders, the importer, exporter, or the likes. So do you see any role that TradeLens would take up some of the responsibility, like a custom broker, or?
Yeah. That's one of the things we so far we try not to be, because you're liable for the declaration as a broker, and that's one of the very important things a broker does. That's not our ambition to be liable. So I really no good answer for that yet. And who then would be liable? Customs would like to have one guy who they can go to and beat on the head if something's wrong. I don't know if there's an alternative model. I'm open for suggestions for that, actually. And since you're all students,
so they are making a lot of suggestions, actually.
Do we keep them?
You will keep them. And again, so what would be nice if you walk through them. They are registered, actually, or so there is an archive of the chat, and that you then can provide answers to that, because there were so many questions that we haven't. By the way, just very briefly, and there is already a comment made here that the question I was posing was very much similar to issues that port community systems actually have. Right? So they also exchange a lot of data. They are technically not, legally not the owner of the data. So in that sense, sharing data is completely different than the responsibility of lodging the data.
Yeah.
So that's I'm quickly going. This is also about the responsibility of the data. So again, we address that kind of issues, and in general, that the future of custom brokerage, so that you can have automated declarations. Perhaps to finalize with, there was a lot of questions about the data quality. Do you foresee that you will make next steps in improving the data quality, for instance, by applying data analytics or whatever, so that you provide that as a next level of to identify anomalies, for instance? So
definitely, we're really on that track. So we're figuring out how. I told you that rating mechanism, like an Uber cab driver. Are you a 4-star or 5-star driver? So are you a reliable data source or not? But also validations, technical validations on consistency of
consistency.
And syntax checks, all that type. So we can do a lot. So we are just figuring out what we do, but we will definitely pick up a role to improve data quality, because we already have made that decision.
And there was one also interesting related question is you mentioned this rating mechanism that about the terminal, that you say, well, if there's a consistent inaccurate data about arrival time or departure time, who can see the rating? Is that in a systematic way? Do you provide it only to customs, or can anybody? Can you also see it for instance, as a shipper, that you would like to see the quality of your logistics service provider, the rating on that? So which parties can see what type of ratings?
Yeah, so let me be very clear. How we're going to do the data quality improvement is still open, so we don't have the rating. These are still mechanisms we are testing and trying, so they're not implemented. At this moment, a bad quality data, is, well, there's the upload to standard documents. There's already some quality, of course, checks, but the rest is, what you upload will share. That's where we are today. You remember, we're a very young, 2 years old platform, so we're really improving every day. But it will be for everybody. So it's a freight forwarder can see how reliable the terminal is, and because he wants to plan on the estimated time of arrival or the planned time of arrival, that type of stuff. That's the idea of TradeLens is, and maybe I wasn't too clear in the beginning, is to speed up and to make easy the movement of containers from A to B. And in that movement, customs is an important player. And that's why we put so many effort to make it attractive for customs to participate. If customs participate, they can make the clearance process easier. They can help reduce time on the question and answers. Of course, inspections, you know, if you have to do an inspection because there's a real reason, then please do that and find the criminals. That's also in everybody's interest in the end, by the way. But that is the model. So it's about speed of movement, making it easier, cheaper, to make the supply chain move smooth across the world.
Okay. So this is a very good statement to end with.
Yeah.
Make a better world.
World peace. World peace.
And if we would have had more time, then the last question would be, and how did COVID affect TradeLens? But that is for another webinar.
Okay.
That is for next time. Okay. Norbert, thanks very much. And all the audience, thanks for being so active, participating in all the questions. And again, we will communicate with Norbert afterwards your questions and see if he can further provide more specific feedback on that. Yes? Okay. So good to see you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. See a lot of familiar faces. Yeah.
So I think
I see Limburg is also represented.
Yeah.
Oh, they're all on mute, huh?
Yeah.
Can you unmute them? How many have we left?
So you, yeah.
24, 23.
Can you unmute them? Maybe we can have an after chat.
Sure. Unmute all. There we go. There's Rob.
Yeah. Hello.
Guys.
So
you know all that stuff already, of course. So for you, it was.
Okay. So then we. Yeah. Okay. Carol, do you close the meeting then?
I can close it. Yeah.
Okay. See you all.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.